If I asked you how a kind and innocent person could turn into a human monster, you'd probably think it's just a normal question. But what if I asked you about the kindest and closest person to you? Someone you know would never hurt a fly, someone who genuinely wishes well for everyone. That exact person who popped into your head while I was saying this, what are the chances that they could become a monster capable of committing the worst crimes imaginable? You'd most likely say the chances are 0%, that it's impossible. But I'm telling you, don't be so quick to assume. Even the most innocent child could grow up to spill blood and destroy everything around them. No one is exempt from this possibility. That's why in this video, we need to understand, why do good people sometimes turn into monsters? I'm Abdulrahman, your guide to the truth. So let's begin. Look, to understand why good people turn bad, we need real-world examples. And that's why we're going to explore the Stanford prison experiment. Focus with me here, unless, of course, you're against learning more about human psychology. But I'll assume you're here to learn, so let me explain. The experiment was designed to study what defines a prison environment. Why do prisoners often become more violent? Why do guards become more sadistic? But things got so out of hand that they had to shut the experiment down after just 6 days. Here's how it all started. A psychologist named Philip Zimbardo received funding from the US Navy to conduct the experiment. He published an ad at Stanford University saying they were looking for volunteers for a psychological prison simulation, paying $15 per day, which is like over $100 today. 70 people responded, and Zimbardo selected only 24 of them. He specifically chose people with no psychological or health issues and no criminal records, all of them college students from middle-class backgrounds. These were the criteria. Then he randomly split the 24 students into two groups of 9, prisoners and guards. To avoid bias, the roles were assigned completely randomly. Zimbardo then tested all of them using psychological scales, which I'll explain simply. The first was the F scale, used to measure how strictly someone adheres to rules and authority. For example, they might ask, should the law be obeyed under all circumstances? Or should people who break the law be punished harshly? The responses ranged from strongly agree to strongly disagree, scored from 5 to 1. Higher scores meant the person was very obedient to authority, even if the orders conflicted with their own morals. The second was the Machiavellianism scale. And even though the guards and prisoners had nearly identical scores across all three scales, something still changed later on. Now, let's talk about the instructions given to the participants. The prisoners were told they wouldn't be physically harmed, with emphasis on physically, and that they'd lose their freedom for 2 weeks while being treated like real prisoners. That's it. They were told to be home on a specific day when the experiment would begin. The guards, on the other hand, were given more detailed instructions. They were provided with uniforms, sunglasses to prevent eye contact, and wooden batons. Zimbardo, acting as the head warden, held a meeting with them and said their job was to maintain order and ensure the daily operations ran smoothly. But he didn't tell them how to do that. They were also told to expect anything: escape attempts, riots, disobedience, and to write daily reports about what happened. They were responsible for things like serving meals and enforcing routine. The prison itself was so poorly designed that prisoners had to stay standing the whole time. There was no place to sit. The cells had surveillance and listening devices to remove any sense of privacy. Each prisoner had only a small child-sized bed, a blanket, and a pillow. Even when they needed to use the bathroom, their eyes had to be covered and they were escorted by a guard. Meanwhile, the guards lived a completely different life. The guards had access to spacious areas, places to eat, change clothes, and relax. They even had scheduled breaks after their shifts. So now, my friend, you've seen the environment in which this experiment took place. Let's move on to how it all began. The experiment officially started on a Sunday. At first, everything seemed normal, but what came next was pure madness. On Sunday morning, real police officers showed up at the homes of the students who volunteered to be prisoners. They were officially arrested, fingerprinted at the police station, and treated like real criminals. After that, they were transported to the mock prison that had been set up inside the university. As soon as they arrived, they were stripped naked and forced to wait in the courtyard before being given their prison uniforms. They were also photographed to create an individual file for each one of them and assigned an ID number, which was printed on their shirts. Then the prisoners were taken to their cells where the prison rules were explained. One key rule was that they would have to go through roll call 3 times a day. During each roll call, they had to identify themselves only by their numbers, not their names. This was done to erase their sense of individuality, to make them feel like they no longer had the rights of a normal human being. And since we're talking about numbers, let me give you 3 real numbers of participants in this study, in case you're interested in grabbing a simple guide that shows you how to start your own online project. But let's keep going. Prisoners were allowed to exercise and were given visitation rights. Each person could be visited twice a week by friends or family. But here's the catch. The guards had the power to change or revoke these rights at any time, depending on what happened in the prison. On the first day, not much happened. The guards stripped the prisoners, gave them uniforms, and locked them in their cells. The day ended calmly. But let me be clear, this was just the calm before the storm. On the second day, things started to go downhill. At 2:30 in the morning, the guards woke up the prisoners in a very aggressive, disrespectful way. Naturally, as college students, they still had a sense of pride, so they weren't happy about being treated like that. They refused to cooperate during roll call and started yelling insults at the guards. This was their way of saying, "We're still free. We still have rights." But the guards didn't take it lightly. Things escalated quickly. The prisoners began blocking their cell doors with their beds and started a full-blown rebellion. The guards responded by using fire extinguishers to spray the prisoners, eventually suppressing the uprising. As punishment, they confiscated the beds. Then came another twist. One of the prisoners began showing signs of psychological distress. Zimbardo didn't believe him at first. He thought the prisoner was faking it. But eventually, it became clear that he had to be removed from the experiment. Zimbardo offered him a deal: return as a special prisoner and act as a spy for the guards. But the prisoner refused and was officially removed from the experiment. At that point, the guards came up with an idea. They decided to turn one of the 3 unused cells into a so-called VIP section. Their message was clear. If you're a good prisoner, you'll be moved to this special cell where you'll enjoy better treatment. So 3 prisoners who hadn't participated in the rebellion were moved to the VIP cell. They were given back their uniforms, beds, even allowed to brush their teeth, and were served better food than the rest. But there was a catch. They had to eat their meals in front of the other prisoners to stir envy and division among them. Half a day later, those VIP prisoners were moved back with the others, and this is when the plan really worked. The other prisoners began to distrust them, believing they had become informants for the guards. By the end of that day, the guards added yet another rule. No prisoners were allowed to use the bathroom after lockdown. If someone really had to go, they were forced to use a small container the guards provided. Then came day 3. On this day, friends and families were allowed to visit the prisoners. But to prevent complaints, the guards cleaned up the prison, gave the inmates better food, and even tidied up the prisoners themselves. They made the visitors sign in and wait 30 minutes before seeing their loved ones, and allowed only 2 people per family to enter. It was, in every sense of the word, a real prison experience. What's really strange, my friend, is that instead of the families complaining about how badly their kids were being treated in the experiment, they actually started negotiating with the guards to make things easier for them. Like they had already accepted deep down that their sons were real prisoners, and this was their new reality. A few hours later, a rumor started spreading among the guards and prisoners. Prisoner 86112, the same one who was removed from the experiment earlier, was planning to come back with others to break everyone out. Eventually, they figured out it was just a rumor. No one was coming to rescue anyone. But even after confirming that, the guards got worse than before. They started denying bathroom breaks and forcing prisoners to do push-ups for hours with no rest. By day 4, Zimbardo brought in a priest to evaluate the situation. The priest met prisoner 819, who was in such bad shape that they decided to let him go. But here's the weird part. As he was about to leave, the guards forced the other prisoners to chant that prisoner 819 was a bad prisoner. That broke him. He had a complete breakdown, crying and begging to stay just to prove he wasn't bad. Zimbardo himself had to step in and remind him this was just an experiment and that he was free to leave. Once he left, they brought in another participant to replace him and gave him the number 416. On day 5, they conducted a survey to see who was willing to give up all their pay just to leave immediately, and 3 prisoners said yes. That alone showed how mentally broken they were, since the whole reason they joined was for the money. Afterward, the prisoners were sent back to their cells, hoping the experiment staff would reconsider. But by then, one thing was clear. The prisoners' sense of reality had collapsed. They were like empty shells, ready to follow any order from the guards. But prisoner 416 wasn't broken yet. He began a new form of resistance, a hunger strike. The guards tried everything to make him eat, but he refused. And what might shock you is that the other prisoners turned against him. They saw his protest as a threat, and the guards manipulated that. They threatened to punish everyone unless 416 gave in. That night, visits were supposed to happen, but were canceled. The prisoners snapped. They cursed at 416 and begged him to eat. He was trying to stand up for everyone, but ended up being hated for it. Then the guards locked him in the hole for 3 hours, even though the maximum time allowed was only 1 hour. The guard on duty? A sadistic guy named John. John offered the other prisoners a choice. Give up your blankets, and we'll let 416 out. Keep your blankets, and he stays in all night. They chose the blankets. On day 6, the experiment was finally shut down. Outsiders stepped in, and it became clear the students were on the edge of a mental breakdown that could stay with them for life. Now here's the part you might already know. There are real prisons where even darker things have happened. Zimbardo himself talked about them in the same book, including places like Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq. He also explained something even deeper, how good people can turn into monsters. But this video isn't about his book, it's about the truth. And the truth is something you can either apply to your own life or reject in the comments and accuse me of spreading unproven ideas just to push some hidden agenda. But since you've watched this far, you probably get the point. So let me give you 3 reasons why people change. Reason 1, personality. Some people are born with kindness in their hearts, while others seem to carry darkness from day 1. Reason 2, environment. Zimbardo's whole experiment proved this. The prison itself changed people, gave guards the power to let their inner darkness grow, and put the prisoners in a place where fear and hate took root. Reason 3, the group. Humans are social beings, even the most introverted ones. We all want to belong, and when we don't belong to anyone, we create our own group in our head. In the prison, it was guards versus prisoners. Each side had shared goals, clothes, and an us versus them mentality. That's how identity forms. You might think this is all theory, but just look around. Football fans, for example, people who are calm and kind in real life turn into wild mobs in stadiums just because they're with their group. The same thing happens in our societies. Most Arabs, for instance, hate the Sykes-Picot Agreement, but at the same time, many hold tight to their nationality, their borders, their dialects, even when those very ideas are part of the division they say they oppose. Or look at old rivalries, Iraqis versus Kuwaitis, Turks versus Arabs, Nazis versus Jews, whites versus blacks. Even inside a single company, you'll find divisions. There's the IT department, and inside that department, cliques and rivalries. The same was true inside the prison. Latinos, Nazis, African Americans, all divided further into smaller groups. And if you think some people don't belong to any group at all, well, even those people usually have their own bias against society itself. Serial killers, for example, often target specific groups of people because of their own hate and anger. And that, my friend, is how good people turn into monsters. At the end of the day, if you're smart, you'll realize you're part of a group, whether you like it or not. Even being alone is its own kind of group, with its own beliefs and biases. So the real question is, why not join mine? Why not walk with me to the end? Think about that. This was Abdulrahman, your guide to the truth. Peace.